Jordan Hamm, it is great to have you on the Single Track podcast.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me, Finn.
So, for context, we have had this ongoing mini series where we're talking with trail athlete managers at all the major brands. We've spoken with David Kilgore at On, Steph Gardner at Solomon, Robert Merke at Adidas Terex. List goes on. And I think it's just an interesting conversation to have because there are a lot of aspiring pro athletes that listen to this show, but also just fans of the sport that are curious to get more insight into what that relationship looks like and how athletes provide value and how brands provide value and just how the whole ecosystem works. So that's a long-winded way of saying I'm super excited you're on the show and I really appreciate your time. And maybe just provide a little bit of background on how you got to Brooks and what your role looks like in that scenario.
Yeah. So, I've been a lifelong follower of the sport of running and have been involved, since my days in middle school. So obviously got more of a start on the track, ran collegiately, and kind of after college, just kind of keeping up with just trying to stay fit and happy and healthy. And ended up finding my way over to Brooks, after a year or so after college, and actually just got my start, just getting my foot in the door, working customer service, working, getting to learn who our customers are, who actually runs in Brooks, and before making my way to work with more of our retail accounts, and been doing that for a couple of years before kind of getting in the right place at the right time, to join the sports marketing team here at Brooks. Just kind of biding my time, waiting for the opportune moment, to join this awesome team. And and sports marketing at Brooks, we on the US side, we definitely have a very strong focus on, or historically anyways, I should say, we've had a strong focus on the track and roads, with our Brooksby Track Club and our Hanson's ODP group. But new in this past year, I've been kind of expanding our trail athlete program, which I've been very excited about. And I have to give a shout out for one of the athletes that is on our team that is been pivotal for me and just getting to learn more about the trail running is Joe McConaughey. We ran together in college when he did his PCT records back in 2014. I was there for his support crew, and that was a big moment for me to just kind of get dive headfirst into the sport of trail running. So,
what are you seeing in the general running market, and more specifically in the trail running landscape, that makes Brooks want to invest more in our space?
Yeah, well, so we have been invested in trail, I would say, at a lower level, in particularly on the product side, specifically footwear. So we've had some solid footwear, specifically the Cascadia, I would say, is probably what we're mostly known for, in the trail space. And so where we're looking and where we're growing is, we're seeing in the market that there's just way more participation in trail, particularly, since the pandemic kind of took off in 2020. People are just looking to get outside more and kind of enjoy nature. And so kind of in a build up to that, though, in the last 5 years, we've expanded our trail product, our trail footwear, developing the Caldera, the Catamount, and the Divide, our four solid shoes. So
I have a question there. So, and if you don't have the answer off the top of your head, that's fine. And maybe we can link to it in the show notes. But I've always wondered where somebody can go on the internet to find the market research that shows like how much participation is growing, how much sales are increasing, not just for shoes, but for like all associated trail running products. And I guess in the case of Brooks, is that like in-house market research that you're doing, or what metrics are you paying attention to? And are they publicly available for people that are interested to see and analyze themselves?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, there are definitely some outlets that you can find online if you're subscribed to it, but a lot of it does come from market research, just yeah, in-house, kind of gauging how key retailers are doing, and what the product that's moving. So there's definitely different ways to look at it. But I would say, yeah, a lot of it has to do with just like in-house market research.
One more thing I want to ask about your job description there as an athlete manager. What is a typical day-to-day look like, or what are your major responsibilities in that position?
Yeah, that's a good question too, because particularly at Brooks, within sports marketing, I mean, we have a kind of another extension to our job is youth marketing. So we put on the Brooks PR Invite, which is a high performance high school track meet. Put that on every June. We're also managing Inspiring Coaches program, as well as the Brooks Booster Club, which are two programs that again focus on the high school level, and provide support for teams. So the day-to-day aspect, it changes all the time. So when it gets to working with athletes, it can vary from just helping them feel supported in some of the races that they're doing, just helping to coordinate photo shoots or video shoots, if there's any like product launches that are taking place. Can be helping to process reimbursements and invoices, kind of executing bonuses. There's a number of different things, but that's kind of one of the fun things of the job, though, is that every day is different.
Well, you mentioned earlier the influence of Joe McConaughey, and by the way, shout out Joe, because he just set an absolutely massive FKT yet again, this time on the John Muir Trail. So shout out String Bean, shout out Joe. But I feel like, in the last 2 years in particular, Brooks has signed some pretty awesome trail athletes to their roster. So you mentioned Joe, Hillary Allen, Sarah Cummings, Garrett Heath, Ladia, like the list goes on. And I guess I'm curious, like when you're thinking about growing your market share in trail running, how important is it to you to have this roster of great athletes, registering great performances in various parts of the sport from a marketing standpoint? Like how important is that to the strategy of growing the brand?
Yeah, I mean it's very important. I mean, they are while they are high performance athletes, they're influencers in their own way. So I mean they're a part of the customer's journey in buying shoes, and someone that is maybe had just learned about Hillary Allen through one of her many activations that she's always that she's part of, and they learn that she's a Brooks athlete, and they find that they are interested in purchasing some, whether it's footwear or apparel. It's just one of the many ways to get runners out there just noticing Brooks, particularly in trail. And so when looking at building out a trail roster, I think one of the challenges in trail in general is that I think when most people think about trail, they think of just ultra, they think of 100 milers, they think of something that is it's going to take a day to do.
Mm.
um, but there's many different aspects to trail running. So, building out a roster that touches on the athlete that excels at a VK or a shorter mountain race, as well as someone that is the multi-day FKT type of runner, and everything in between. So yeah.
It's interesting. I think one of the reasons why I'm curious is because there was this big debate that I think I may have helped instigate on Twitter about how much value there is in, let's just say, an athlete crossing the finish line at Western States in the top 10. So there's a lot of visibility from that standpoint, wearing a particular shoe, wearing particular gear. Like, how much either obvious or subliminal influence does that have on a person who's watching, going and maybe in that moment or at some point down the road investing in Brooks gear? So do you think that is actually helpful from a marketing standpoint and from a sales standpoint, or are these people right that they don't fall, I don't know if prey is the right word, but they're not like truly influenced by what they're seeing in those races, and that like they actually go to the shoe store instead and make this very rational and considered purchase where they try on a bunch of different things and go from there?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if there's the right answer to that question, but at the bottom line, it's thought provoking. It gets that runner, it gets that customer to even consider us whether they are just going to buy something right offline, right in that moment, or if they get the idea to then go into the store and they think about maybe this athlete won this race or was top 10, uh, and I think another aspect to that is like winning a race or being on the podium, like that's a photo that's going to live on for who knows how long. I mean, it's always going to be there. So you kind of have to look at it that way too, that they're part of the history book. If it's just a result with a Brooks being added to the name there, there's definitely a no right answer, I think, for that question.
Personally, I just think it's important to be ubiquitous. Like, if you can be everywhere, anywhere, round the clock in the most important events of our sport, I think it's crucial. Like, I definitely notice the brands that aren't, I mean, as a super fan / media person in the sport, I tend to notice the brands that aren't there. And I'm just like, wow, like, what an opportunity you're missing out on. But anyways, going back to this roster of athletes, I think a lot of listeners would be curious to know, what is the process of scouting for and recruiting these people look like? And maybe you could even paint the picture by talking about a recent example of someone that you're pursuing.
Yeah. So again, just there's more than one way to find the right athlete for the brand, but in some approaches, it's finding an athlete that is already wearing Brooks product. It's someone that's already interested in competing in our footwear or apparel. And myself and my team, we're always looking through results every week to see what's going on, who's showing up to which races, and it's a process that I mean, it's a long, maybe not a long drawn out process. It takes time, I'll say. It's not something that happens overnight. But it's something probably on an annual basis that I know we definitely look at trying to bring in new athletes towards the start of a new calendar year, to kind of keep things clean. But it's not how it always happens. And one of my goals with this group, this team, is to just develop some younger talent, to get some runners that are right out of the NCAA, athletes that show that they can compete, the NCAA is a tried and true, format for competition. But trying to find the athlete that is going to excel at a 50K that has 10K of vert.
I was just going to say, yeah.
That's a challenge.
Well, do you have any example, like just to paint the picture more for folks that like learn via story and via example? Are there any athletes, for example, in the NCAA ranks that you've been interested in recently? And talk about that maybe, because I mean, you just said it, but well, first of all, I think it's super cool that you're thinking that early in the process, because I think one of the issues in our sport is, at least from a fan standpoint, I think too many people wait to enter into trail and ultra running until they're in their mid 20s, early 30s at best. And so, paint a picture maybe of how you go and recruit an athlete from the college ranks, and why you're okay with taking that leap of faith in terms of, the fact that they'll be performing in new arenas.
Yeah. Like you had said, and with NCAA athletes, like just trying to bridge that gap to get the younger athletes just right into trail, so that there isn't that 1, 2, 5 year gap before they're competing at a high level again. So I mean, a recent example is this athlete. His name is Talon Hall. He was competing for the University of Washington, and last fall, so fall 21, just started to reach out to him. I actually had kind of a funny way of coming upon, realizing that he was interested in trail, was just noticing he was popping up on Strava on a lot of the routes that I was personally like doing. So it was definitely eye-catching. And then just, making that first intro, and also learning from some of the other Brooks athletes that had also kind of crossed paths with him, and just kind of building a relationship from there, and exploring what options were for post college, if trail running was a goal, and just kind of going step by step to get him in a Brooks uniform, when the time was right. And he's someone that's is excelled on the track as well as cross country, and 10K. So there's definitely some key races that I think are indicators for potential success on the trail, and he's definitely someone that we're willing to take a risk. So
that is super cool, and I want to key in on what you said there about doing research via Strava segments to find athletes. And I can't remember who told me this, and I'm bummed because they deserve credit on this podcast for me saying this. But I recently heard that in the cycling world, this is common, where there are cycling brands out there that will search, biking KOMs on Strava, and they will recruit athletes to their teams based on that. So it's amazing to me. You think about the influencer world and like looking up follower count and stuff like that in other industries, and maybe it does exist to some extent in trail too. But the idea that Strava can become this opportunity for athletes to show off to brands, and I mean that in a very positive way. It's like a place. It's like their version of like a resume from a performance standpoint. That is super cool to me. And so I don't really have a question there. So just more a comment. Like, that's awesome.
Yeah, I mean, I never really thought Strava would be a tool like that, but it's an opportunity just to kind of like get a an inside look at what a potential athlete is doing in their training, and a lot of these segments are tried and true. So it's not going to be there's if it's not a soft segment, then there's a good reason why they may be or they have the potential to compete at a higher level. So.
My brain is already kind of running wild with ideas, but like, for example, I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I can already think of a number of notable trail segments where if I was a brand, I would just be favoriting those segments and returning to them, refreshing them every day or week. Like there's a mountain right outside of Salt Lake City. It's called Grandeur Peak, and the west face of that peak is just it's a part of like trail running and segment lore in our town. Like if you're anybody who's anybody in the mountain scene, you're attempting a PR on that or a KOM. And I actually think that the KOM has stood for like maybe 8 years at this point. And anyways, if I was a brand like Black Diamond or La Sportiva, anybody that's looking for athletes in that like VK sub ultra scene, I would be going to that segment and seeing who's on the leaderboard and who's still relevant. This is so cool.
I have to take notes.
Let's talk offline. I'll give you all the segments for Salt Lake City. But anyways, okay. Follow-up question, slightly different angle here. How much stock does Brooks put into athletic performance versus social media performance when considering signing an athlete?
Typically, for my group and looking at Brooks Sports Marketing, we're looking at performance as number one. Social and having a personal brand that's already built out is obviously a huge plus, and it obviously shows that the athlete is committed to their craft and what they're doing. But it's social is something that doesn't happen overnight. It's the same with performance, I guess. Like obviously there's a ton of training that goes in, and you pop one race and you find that you have 15 minutes of fame, but as an athlete, you got to find a way to over time kind of build up what those your followers or what your personal brand is and what you're known for. So it's an opportunity for us to help them find that way. We're not always going to find a Hillary Allen that has an established following. Talon as an example, doesn't have a massive following, and it's not a knock on him, but it's something that's that we can build out together and build out over time too. So long answer to be short on it. Performance, definitely over kind of over social.
So when
media.
you say build out a following together, does that mean like opportunities to collaborate on certain campaigns or like with North Face, for example? I know that they will intentionally take part in a lot of these FKTs that their athletes will attempt, and they'll bring like video crews out there. Like I was just interviewing Caitlin Gerben for a UTMB pre-race interview, and she was out in Patagonia, I think 5 or 6 months ago with one of her team partners. And I want to say North Face just brought like an entire content team down there to document the entire process. And, I'm sure Caitlin made a post about it, but a lot of the production was outsourced to the brand, which I think is interesting.
That is definitely one opportunity to, kind of collaborate and build out, or help an athlete kind of build out their following. But it's also like capturing content, at races, for the athlete to be able to utilize, and just kind of creating opportunities where, we haven't done this yet, but having like a team summit, a team, training camp, and utilizing that as an opportunity for an athlete to get content that, maybe they wouldn't normally plan or think of trying to do. And there's, collaborating with retailers as well. It's another way that we leverage our athletes and some of our relationships with, specialty running accounts, all over the country. So, and then even race event partners, and this would be more so on the road running side. We actually we just sponsored our first trail race last year, the JFK 50. So we're super excited about it. And last year was definitely a success. And actually one of the reasons, or maybe not one, but Sarah Cummings won that race in 2021, and she's now a Brooks sponsored athlete. That's just a kind of going back to your previous point, another way to kind of get that attention.
She's local here. I think she's based over in Park City, and she crushes. And I think she's going for the 100K World Championships later this year, which is exciting too. Okay.
Yeah.
So I guess my next question then is, and again, knowing that you can only offer an opinion here based on what you value at Brooks, if you were talking to an up and coming, potentially sponsor worthy athlete in our sport, would you encourage them to focus more on performance or to focus more on building an audience, building a social media following?
That's a good question. I mean, you got to be able to hit performance. So, I mean, you got to prioritize training, making sure that, you're putting in the work. And that's, 95% of what we're looking at, that, times and podiums, those do matter. And everything else, people are going to follow you. People are going to want to invite you to different races, to different events, different media events, over time, and that's something that would follow. I would go with that.
Cool. I'm curious, transitioning just a little bit, I would love to talk about the way the team is structured. And I know that there are, the answer to a lot of these is probably it depends, because everybody has different life circumstances. But just offering like a rough sketch, how many athletes on the Brooks Trail roster would you say have the opportunity to do this full time just based on the compensation they're getting from their contract?
Yeah, like you had mentioned, it obviously depends on what what would be viewed as or what they would want to view as a full-time commitment to trail running and trail racing. Yeah, but our group, I mean, I would roughly say about like half of the group, and a lot of it is also just dependent on the athlete themselves, and that a lot of them have pursued careers or specifically want to pursue a career to supplement trail running. So I mean, it's yeah. I don't know if I have.
No, that's fine. No, I'm just trying to set the table here for a bunch of questions. How about contracts? Like, do you tend to default to 1-year contracts, or are most of these athletes on multi-years?
Yeah, so we definitely look in the long term, and that we want to develop the athletes. So they're all on a multi-year deal process, and we're kind of hedging our bets too, and this is maybe not even like it's not a what's the word I'm looking for? I would say that like we're hedging our bets in that the trail would be in the Olympics at some point. So just getting our contracts aligned with an Olympic cycle, that gives the athlete the opportunity to really map out what they want to do in the next 2, 3, 4 years, depending on kind of where we land in the cycle and everything.
I love that.
It just it gives everyone, I think, a clearer picture, a bit more more runway to figure out what we can do.
I was talking with Robert Merke from Adidas Terex a couple of weeks ago, and they follow a similar playbook. He didn't quite describe it the way you did with aligning towards this hypothetical Olympic cycle, which, by the way, if trail running is ever the Olympics, that's awesome. But he did say, we do have this 2 to 3 year progression where we honestly don't expect that much from a performance standpoint in that first year, because the athlete is spending a lot of time meeting with the product team, testing gear, meeting with the marketing team to understand like what content is going to resonate and what tools they have at their disposal to be helpful in that regard. And a lot of times they're signing younger athletes and they're expecting an evolution, and they're expecting these breakthroughs to come like 2 to 3 years after the investment's made. So, yeah, I just liked the way you framed that with the Olympic cycle thought process. And I think maybe most importantly, just taking pressure off the athletes in the short term so that they can actually focus on their craft without getting bugged out about, if I get injured or if I have a poor performance here or there, this is over. Like this, they don't feel like it's this tenuous, fleeting opportunity they have. So again, not really a question there, just more a comment.
No, it's a good follow-up to it though. And I think it just makes sense. Because it is a partnership. It's not just like if we sponsored 50 to 60, trail runners, maybe it's a little bit more kind of black and white or a little more cut and dry. And, we give you a stipend and, you go do whatever you want to do. But, we're selective. It's why we have a smaller roster, and, we're very intentional there. So.
These next couple questions, I want to lay out some context. They're definitely not intended to be gotcha questions. In fact, we can talk generally about the industry when I ask them. I should just say that I'm interested in them because I think one of my big missions is to help facilitate an environment where more athletes, if they want to have the opportunity to make a living out of our sport, either a little bit more than full-time or full-on full-time. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the opportunities that athletes have to figure that all out. Do you think that there are some opportunities that already exist out there where if an athlete wants to understand, for example, how much they could make year to year, or what they could get in terms of race fees covered or airfare covered or health insurance, stuff like that. Do you think that there is at least some of that already exists out there for them to review and to use, as a part of their negotiation?
Yeah, there's definitely a lot there. And there's a lot to consider for, a new athlete particularly. Because they don't have that experience on their side, and it's for some athletes it doesn't make sense to pursue an agent, someone that has that kind of inside knowledge, I guess, have the experience, so coming into negotiations with a brand. I think it's important just to make it clear that it's a conversation and not something where, that if you say the wrong thing, that everything is done, that everything unfolds. It's just, you can do all you can to make sure that, you get, a conversation with the right person, or the right people at a brand. Persistence definitely helps, but just finding different ways to, have touch points with the brand. So whether it's interacting with the brand through social media, through races, there's definitely more than one way to get there, I guess. Which I realize probably doesn't answer the question.
No. I think it's good. I think there's going to be a lot of back and forth here because just a lot of stuff comes to mind. I mean, I love thinking as deeply as possible about the psychology of the athlete in the situation, and vice versa, the people on the other side, like yourself and the rest of the brand and the marketing team. But one thing that shocks me, I shouldn't say shocks me, it's fascinating in the world of trail running. It seems like a lot of the athletes, I'm not going to say a majority, but enough for me to notice a lot of the athletes are satisfied with, I would say, the label of being called a pro athlete. And then I would say the opportunity to just get some gear. So in some, just like the smallest bit of recognition that what they're doing is impressive and important. And when I'll ask them about, do you care anything about the financial parts of this and making sure you have all your bases covered there and you're leveraging everything at your disposal? And I talk about things like, what if this was more open, or what if you knew this piece of information? There's actually kind of a hesitancy there. Like they'll say, well, if this stuff was made public, then I would know what my teammates made and they would know what I made. And that's kind of embarrassing. And which is interesting to me, because I would, in that moment, I would never, at least if I was in their shoes, I would never like compare myself to my teammates. I would think more like, oh, like, am I getting everything I possibly could have in the negotiation with the brand? And so again, not really a question there. It's just the psychology in our world is just super fascinating. And I'm not saying it's wrong. I'm not saying it's right, but I will say it's not how I typically would have gone about it, because I've never done this. Like when I think about and sorry, I'm kind of rambling here, but like when I think about my own negotiation process with, like a software company, if I'm applying for a marketing role, when I receive like a contract offer, my first instinct is not to accept it. And even if I do accept it, like the first words out of my mouth aren't something like, so grateful that Google took a chance on me, won't let you down. Like it's more just like, okay, let's get to work. Like I'm applying my skills, but that does exist here. So I don't know. What are your thoughts about that whole environment?
Yeah. So I think, to the athletes out there, like you, in this process, like you really just have to figure out, and really learn and kind of stick to, finding what you think your value is, and just being able to advocate for yourself when you do get to, the negotiation table, because that's going to say a lot about you as a person, and knowing that future situations, like you're going to be asking, the right questions to get yourself even further. So it's, yeah. And I think, to kind of like go back to your point about like, I don't know, trying to like compare yourself to teammates and such. And, uh, our athletes, they are viewed as independent contractors. So, it's different than, a professional sports league where, they're on a team in that sense. And you're being paid by one specific owner, I guess, like that. So when you view yourself as a professional trail athlete, you also need to look at yourself through the lens of being a
Yes.
self-owned business. So putting together some form of a business plan, and how you can execute your goals 1, 3, 5 years out from now. It's going to make a huge difference. And frankly, like when we do get being asked by athletes, or just kind of getting, I don't know, essentially cold calls or emails, having a built out deck goes a long way. You really get to realize how professional this person is.
I love what you said there about the deck, and I think it bears repeating. David Kilgore at On said the same thing. I was like, when you get all this inbound, what stands out? And he's like, honestly, these people that treat themselves like a business entity, and they're sending out this deck that tells you exactly what they're going to offer from a branding standpoint, from an awareness standpoint, from a performance standpoint. Like, here's what I've done. Here's where I'm at. Here's my future plans. It's super strategic. And I think for anybody listening out there, like, let's change the culture. Like, start sending decks. Like, yes, send your, drop into their DMs, but send the decks. So anyways, I just think what you said there is super important, but it does remind me, because actually in this podcasting world, when I solicit sponsorship, I am also an independent I am an independent contractor in some cases, or I have been. And you know, part of being a business is you're accountable for everything. You're not taking a W-2, you're not getting health insurance, and like our sport is dangerous. And I mean, you just signed an athlete recently, Hillary Allen, who experienced this firsthand. Like she was out at the Tromso Sky Race 4 or 5 years ago and literally fell off a cliff and almost died, and incurred God knows how much in terms of medical expenses. And after all the dust had settled, and like I was personally like mourning for her situation, I thought, who foots the bill there? And I got to imagine, to the most extent, it's her. And I'm wondering if you can comment on like the reasons why an athlete might not just be considered a full-time marketing employee. Like they would be treated the same in terms of from an employee standpoint as like, your paid search marketing manager or yourself, like an athlete marketing manager. Like, can you talk about to the extent that why that distinction might be made?
Yeah, well, to be honest, I don't actually know. I don't know if I have the right answer as to why an athlete was not brought on as a full-time employee. Uh, I think it is, maybe it's just part of the performance standpoint. At some point, performance does start to, I guess, maybe not performance. Maybe just some of the objectives for
Yeah.
an athlete change over time. So the ask for them to be performing at a higher level to then, I guess in a perfect world trajectory, like you become world champion 3 times over, and you have incredible following, and you become more of an entity yourself, that you are almost a
Yeah.
standalone brand. And you become, an influencer in that sense. But yeah, I don't know if I have a
Yeah. I was
great
just
answer for
curious.
that.
Okay. I want to add one more question on this front, and then I want to talk about trail running teams, because I think that Brooks would actually be an interesting brand to actually try to prove out this model in trail. But yeah, on the money front, I'm curious. And again, I think we should probably talk generally about the industry here. It's almost a given that every single one of these athlete contracts is going to include an NDA where, and I'm definitely missing a lot of key points here, but how I understand it, it means that athletes just can't talk about the details of their contracts. And I'm wondering, what's the rationale for including an NDA in a contract? And how does that benefit both the brand, and how does that benefit the athlete?
Yeah, when it comes down to like, NDA for the athlete, I do think it's to their own benefit, not having to, share that information, not having that outside pressure. I think, like I had mentioned before, that we're not a professional sports league. There isn't a major, trail running league, and you footwear and apparel sponsors they're just that.
Yep.
They're one of the sponsorships
Yep.
that works with an athlete. So we're not a major team.
That's a great point. I think that's a super
Yeah.
great point. And I oftentimes forget, because, my experience in the sports world is rooted in the NBA and the MLB and the NFL, where the relationship between, for example, an athlete like LeBron James and Nike, which would be the equivalent to what like Jim Walmsley has with Hoka, is so incredibly secondary to the relationship he has on a contractual basis with his team and the players union in the league and stuff like that. So I think it is fair to bring that up. One thing from Twitter, though, and again, if you're not on running Twitter, you got to check it out, because there's some hilarious and honestly pretty interesting conversations that go on. But as we've started to talk there about just like the current pros and cons of the athlete sponsor relationship, there was one person out there that made the claim that the presence of an NDA necessarily means that one of the two sides is probably getting underserved or quote unquote screwed to some extent. And I'm wondering if you think that that's a fair portrayal of an NDA in a lot of these circumstances. Like, do you think that that necessarily means that athletes are getting significantly less than they're worth in the negotiation process? Or do you think that, like, by and large across the industry, an effort is made to budget for the team and then to distribute compensation as fairly as possible?
Yeah, I don't think it inherently shows that there's something off with the the agreement, or that it's out of balance. Um, but yeah, I mean, speaking generally, like, that also would show how much a private brand would be spending on certain
Right.
certain area of the business too. Like, there is that implication as well, which is obviously that's
Right.
beyond kind of
Is it,
what
and does that
my
mean to, like,
scope
protect
of
against
work anyway.
competition?
So
So, like, you wouldn't want another competing brand to have a sense of how much you're investing in a particular space?
yeah, I think so. I mean, that is one way to kind of protect protect the, I don't know, this maybe not the secrets, protect the
Yeah.
protect the brand itself. Yeah, and just kind of staying one foot in front of
Cool.
some of the
Well,
competitors. So
let's move on. Let's talk about trail running teams. And the reason why I bring this up is because, I mean, I've had some of your athletes on the podcast before. I talked with Garrett Heath, and I know he has a long history as a member of the Brooks Beasts. And I mean, you mentioned Hanson's Brooks earlier in the conversation. And it just seems to me that the time is right for a brand like Brooks or Solomon or Hoka to experiment with this co-located format and trail. And so I guess my question to you is, why don't you think it hasn't happened already? And let's start there, actually. Why don't you think it's happened yet?
um, I mean, I think to some degree, that comes down to funding. I do think there's been some, like, probably like some natural formations of I wouldn't, maybe not call them teams, but
Right.
like a collection of athletes that just happen to live in the same happen to live in the same town, and train together every so often or so. But yeah, I think that largely just comes down to funding, and if it comes from the brand specifically, and there's you've seen it in the track worlds, where there's kind of maybe two different approaches where uh, one group is funded by one particular brand. We'll just say Hanson's. Well, that's actually not even a good example, because the Hansons are actually, they operate their own team just based on their
Yeah.
own
Yeah.
specialty run business that they run, and so we sponsored the club. But yeah, so when you're looking at the Beast Track Club, I mean, they're obviously fully funded by by Brooks. But then you look at clubs like Team Boss. That's a mix of different sponsored athletes. Out in the Crested Butte, and uh, so, like, to get to a point where we're seeing more training groups in trail. I do think we're going in that direction, and I think getting getting the NCAA kids to jump right into trail, I think, is really going to help with that. Which it is one of my goals to like I mentioned, to create or just to get more NCAA talent into
Yeah.
trail sooner rather than later. Um, so I feel that we could be there soon. I'm beating those drums, I'll say.
Well, I
um,
appreciate
but
that. And yeah, I
yeah,
mean, geez, just to reflect on that comment you made about, the talent pool in the NCAA, I think another way to increase the allure of trail and ultra running right after college is to show that a similar model that existed for them in college, that they're used to, this, this team environment, very close knit. You're training, you're hanging out, you're eating together. A version of that is going to exist in trail, because right now, I mean, like you said, maybe you meet up with a couple people that are like-minded in a particular city or region, but you're kind of on your own. And maybe that's why people have delayed the jump, or maybe that's one reason why people have delayed the jump, because as you get older, maybe you become more sure of yourself and more mature, and not needing like maybe as vibrant a social environment to be happy and okay. And I don't know, I'm just kind of speculating here, but I think that's cool that you're thinking in those terms, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, partly why, we haven't necessarily seen it, is that there's been, a lot of runners that also carry, full-time jobs or pursue careers as well. And, trying to find that in a very tight team knit, type of environment, it can definitely be a challenge. But with, the more the sport that, gets professionalized, we'll definitely
Jordan, I got to
there,
say, it's been such a pleasure to have you on the show. And I mean it sincerely when I say I appreciate your willingness to contribute to this conversation, because I think it's a good one to have. And I think that at the end of the day, it's positive sum and everybody involved wins. And it's also cool to know that, your brand is investing so significantly in trail right now. And not to hold you to it, but you're thinking about trail teams at some point in the future. And yeah, I guess maybe the last thing we can talk about, is there anything that you're particularly excited about in the coming months about trail running and Brooks that you think the audience might be interested in hearing?
Yeah, I mean, there's a number of things, and I think off the bat, and again, not sure when this will air, but this upcoming weekend is the Brooks Trail Summit. So it's a kind of a festival celebrating all things related to trail running. So it's really targeted at just getting kind of the runners who are just kind of curious about trail running, getting them out on the trails in a kind of a fun and inclusive environment.
Okay.
So that's coming up. So I mean, if this airs afterwards,
I mean, this was so. I'm honestly, I'm kind of chomping at the bit to publish this like today. So we'll talk though.
All right. Yeah. Man. All right. I guess last thing then. I gotta pitch it here though.
Yes.
With UTMB right around the corner. Yeah. Just keep an eye out for some Brooks U.S. trail athletes. Hillary Allen, UTMB, and then in CCC we've got Mario Mendoza, Cap Bradley, and Laddie Albertson Junkins. And then in OCC, keep an eye out for Kimber Maddox and Jared Bassett. So really excited for those 6 athletes to be challenging the course.
Very cool. Well, Jordan, great to hang here for an hour, and we'll have to do it again at some point in the future. But I'll actually be over there in Chamonix in a week to go spectate, and those are all strong names. Hillary and Ladia and
awesome.
Kat. I think those are going to be names to watch at CCC and UTMB. Mario too. Mario is strong. So anyways, he has. Mm-hmm. Cool. Well, hey, thanks again. And okay, we're going into, I guess I'm going to call this segment Single Track Overtime, because I realized that I've been wanting to ask Jordan this question for a while, and it didn't dawn on me until after we had closed out the interview. For context, the first pair of, when I hiked the Appalachian Trail back in 2014, I wore a Brooks Cascadia 8, and I'm pretty sure it was exclusively because I read Eat and Run by Scott Jurek, and yeah, that book just left an impression on me. It might have been Eat and Run. Anyways, I was aware of Scott Jurek, and he's still incredibly relevant in a lot of ways in our running world. Like, he just recently went after the Appalachian Trail FKT again in 2021. But obviously, his role in the sport has transitioned. He's not racing nearly as frequently. So I'm curious, what does that look like at Brooks? Like, when you're an athlete at his stage in his career, what value does he bring to the organization? What are the things that he might do on behalf of the brand on a daily basis? And because I think I'm just generally fascinated by ways that athletes can stay relevant even after like the bulk of their competitive careers have passed.
Yeah, it's a good question. I'm charging you extra for this one. Going over. Uh, uh, just kidding. No, with Scott, I mean, he's someone that has obviously just kind of transcended the sport, and is someone, who just kind of captures everything about trail running, and the trail community, and he's just an outdoor adventurer, I guess to put a label. But yeah, he's someone that he works more closely now with like our influencer marketing department or team, um, and it's something that like he still obviously provides a ton of value. His voice, in the sport, and his opinion on what's going on, matters. People will still gravitate towards him when there's anything that is related to Scott Jurek, and I feel like we have similar stories in that we were both hooked in first learning about Scott Jurek back in the day, and just reading Born to Run and Eat and Run. Those are two prime examples of how an athlete can kind of expand their own personal brands to continue on after when they're competing at their peak.
Yep.
So
cool.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, no, I'm fascinated for two reasons. One, I can see the photo behind you. I think it's Scott running with one of the Tarahumara, which by the way is super cool. And to her credit, Steph Gardner mentioned that at Solomon they have this thing called the Inspiration Team, where they have athletes on their roster like Ricky Gates, who's primarily this photographer, storyteller type runner, and Rich Roll, who we all know is a podcast host and wellness person. And so yeah, it's just cool. It's cool that there's ways to be involved beyond purely competition at that point in your career. So all right, that's all I had.
Yeah.